Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Kelly. Good evening, and if I can have your attention, please. I do want you to continue eating, and I know some of you are still being served, not a problem, but to deal with the inevitable challenge of staying on schedule at a conference, I'm going to go ahead and start our evening session and start with a deep felt Southwest Virginia welcome to Roanoke, Virginia, and the region that I have called home for most of my life. Brief stint out in North Carolina, so, from some of you I'm grateful to have known from that time, but it is really special to have Virginia Funders Network here as an initial steering committee member. I know it was a very important commitment to host our gatherings in different parts of the state. So as a true member of the 9th District, nicknamed the Fighting 9th of Virginia's congressional history, I do have to say there's about a third of Virginia still down southwest of here. So please come back and take a tour, and we'll hopefully give you more reasons to do that during the session tonight. I do want to thank, as you've already heard today, our Bank of America and Community Foundation of Greater Richmond for their support of this session tonight. It is really special to be able to break bread together and have this meal. And it's also really special to get through a day that started with many of the breakout pre-conference sessions, followed by this wonderful lunch session, and then the afternoon breakouts. And now we're just having some fun together, and so I hope that will continue through the evening. I've been given the task of sort of pulling together some reflections from the afternoon, introducing 3 fabulous leaders, and a 4th who will be here via video, who have done really great place-based and community-based work, and then transition to our kind of after party before 8 o'clock. So we will clear this room before 8 o'clock. If you're getting nervous, that's your time frame. So where do you start to unpack a day like today? I think each of us would handle that differently, but I'm going to give you 3 reflections. So here's what I've got. First of all, one of my most frustrating lessons in life is you don't know what you don't know. And I know it sounds trite, but every time I think I'm getting an idea for something, I get really excited only to find out maybe it didn't work as well as I thought it would. And I hearken back to some adages when I think about life, and one of them was an old seasoned professional when I first started my career in public policy. And she said, "Mary, don't get too wound up. The solutions to today's problems are the problems of tomorrow." And I was like, well, dang, that's not very encouraging. But thank goodness any of us still in this field are really optimists. And so we don't give up on those hardships of lessons learned. But we do have to acknowledge sometimes our blind spots make it really hard to see what we don't know, and therefore to be really effective in our work. So then when I find something that breaks through one of those blind spots, I get really excited. So when I first came across the social determinants of health or the social determinants of well-being, I was like, now we're talking, because I'd worked in economic transformation work and I'd been a little bit in education, and I'm like, now we're seeing it, we're connecting it. And sure, we're diverse funders. We each do some different things. You don't have to do it all, but that framework suddenly really made a lot of sense. And I'd worked in government, and we talked about breaking down silos. We're still working on breaking down silos, and they're not just in government, they're not just in philanthropy, they're just even in communities. And I'm in a rural community. I am with the Allegheny Foundation in Covington, Virginia, and we serve Allegheny County and the city of Covington. We're about an hour and a half northwest of here. And we still have to work really hard, even when a lot of people know everything about everybody and all their business, to find out ways to find common language and common direction. So the social determinants of health or well-being, as we were talking about at lunch today, really was a great breakthrough for me as sort of how do we think about things. And probably like many of you, you start thinking a different way, you try to act a different way, and then you find the next set of roadblocks, which is how do you actually put into practice the social determinants of well-being. And that's why I loved Dr. Tony Iton today at lunch. You know, it was about practice, and he gave us the key components, one of which belonging stood out, a word I haven't heard much, but also engagement stood out strongly, and then focusing on change and engagement as a strategy for change around policy and fairness and equity. So how powerful was that? I just love Dr. Aitan. He spoke to me, talked to my board chair who's here. We agreed. Tremendous way to think about deepening the work. And I've loved community organizing, but somehow connecting the gaps has been really hard. And some of you may have heard Catherine Fulton, a futurist who grew up in Roanoke, who went and did some presentations with grant makers for effective organizations. And she often uses a visual, which I don't have today, but it's sort of like a pyramid sitting on the ground and an inverted pyramid intersecting. And the insight she offered was top down rarely gets all the way down, and bottom up rarely gets all the way up. So one of the spaces where philanthropy can maybe make a difference is filling out the middle. So we do look more like a cylinder than two pyramids. So I offer that as sort of an insight because I think the California Health Endowment is really showing the way. I'll come back to his future comment though, but I do think they've shown the way of something very, very important that deepens the practice of social determinants of well-being. That leads me to my second comment, which is that when we try to work and practice, and I guess this is sort of my personal interest, is how do we put theory into practice? How do we put ideas and strategies forward? We really have to find language and work at the engagement that helps build those connections. And again, I'm not just referencing Dr. Aitan, but also many other speakers today who talked about connecting children, dealing with the environment, working on the challenges of impact investing, and just coming together to not look for obstacles, but look for ways to move forward. So really powerful ideas were being discussed today, and I hope you'll take those home. Which leads to my third point, and that one is kind of back into stories that you hear along the way. We're mostly Southerners in here. I've met a few transplants, but we love our stories. And one that stuck years ago and about which I've changed my thinking was that story that many of you have heard about the man who walks up to a person who's laying brick. And he says, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, I'm laying brick. You know, what does it look like I'm doing?" So he asks another person, and that person says, "Well, I'm building a wall." And he gets to a third person, and he says, "Well, I'm building a cathedral." And I've always loved those different perspectives, but I think in an unconscious way, I provided a bias towards building the cathedral was somehow right. Like there's a vision of a cathedral, and we should be working towards the vision all the time. But I think Scott hit on the details. The bricks are very, very important. And rarely do we get to put the whole cathedral together. So this notion of building a good foundation and putting one good brick down and doing that really well may be the best thing that each of us can do. And certainly when I do my day-to-day work, like many of you who are signing checks and writing up grant summaries and doing things that sometimes can feel very detailed and maybe even monotonous, I hate to say it, but as you go through those exercises, I do have to think about the brick layers. We are laying brick, and hopefully we're putting those bricks together in a way that make the walls, and those walls not only transform into cathedrals, but they also can transform into cities. So as I think about these images, I think that's really a great way to segue into our different speakers that we have for today, because each of them is sort of showing us how to engage, how to really put a lot of bricks together. And walls do have sort of a solid image that maybe they're serpentine walls, because we know Thomas Jefferson loved those, or pick your metaphor. But the idea that we're putting a puzzle together with a lot of different and very important pieces is really the notion that I think all of us are trying to figure out, and it's so wonderful to have this space to work on it together. It's also wonderful to have people who are working on success. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you the names and the organizations they represent. And I believe they're going to be walking up while I do that. And then we will watch a mix of videos and storytelling to go with those. And then we'll have a bit of a moderated session and question and answer. So that's the format of where we're headed. And the first person I would like to ask to come up is Kristen Johnson, who represents Real Life. We will be seeing their video first, and I will let the video speak for itself because we do believe a picture paints 10,000 words. We do not have a video for Allison Gilbreth with Voices for Virginia's Children, but the great thing about Allison is she's got a lot to say, so she's going to tell her own story, and we're thrilled to have her here. The third video we'll be watching is with the Partnership for Housing Affordability. Our leader there, Jovan Burton, is not able to be with us tonight. And then it'll be the fourth presentation, but the third video from the Calfee Community and Cultural Center is Minty Villinger. I hope you will give them each a warm welcome as they come forward, and we will begin the videos and our session. Thank you.
Real Life has given me a second chance at life.
Gave me a chance to be better for myself.
Real Life has given me a new perspective on life.
Just taught me how to love myself.
Has given me the support and family that I never had.
Real Life has given me an opportunity to build a stronger foundation so I can stand up and be a man instead of being a little boy these days.
Has opened doors for me that I wouldn't have thought would have been open before.
Has given me a new life to live. Given me the structure I need to reconnect with family and restructure my life.
And I enjoy being in this program.
Real Life was birthed out of some research in the Richmond jail that I conducted to determine effectiveness of programming in the jail, especially as it relates to recidivism. After the research was completed, I was hired full-time to be the program director under Sheriff Woody, where we started the Real program. It was a great program. We had incredible results in lowering recidivism rates and really preparing folks for release once that time came in their life. Unfortunately, though, folks were still struggling when they got out. And so as a response, we started Real Life in the community as a nonprofit organization to help folks with little things initially. Things like bus tickets and resumes, items that were necessary for success but not readily available. In April of 2017, we opened our first recovery house, which we still have today. And that was an opportunity for folks that did not have financial resources to finally be able to access safe, stable housing. And from there we grew, realizing that just providing a roof over somebody's head is simply not going to be enough. In December of 2017, we opened our community center, and that was really the first time that comprehensive, holistic programming was provided by Real Life. It was the first time that we had full-time staff, we had programming, we had the intensive case management, and a slew of classes and other services.
Real Life with Real Life is our 22-module behavior modification curriculum. That curriculum focuses on things like healthy relationships. Are we fostering relationships that benefit us, or are we fostering relationships that could detriment us in the future? Sobriety. Are we able to identify our triggers? Are we working towards maintaining sobriety, or are we doing things that possibly could put that at risk? And finances. Are we saving our money, or are we spending our money frivolously? All of those things, among many others, are included in the 22 modules, and clients come in and they are with us for about 6 months, and they're really able to develop that blueprint for a thriving life.
When we think of women in addiction, a lot of times we don't think about the fact that so many of these women are mothers, and we also a lot of times don't think about women that are pregnant who are also battling addiction. So here at Real Life, we provide an opportunity for them to heal, for them to grow, and even at times get reconnected to their children.
Real Life has provided me an opportunity to live in a safe environment and also allowed me the opportunity to give birth to a healthy baby boy free and clear of drugs and alcohol.
The Real Life program has meant and done so much for me in this process since my incarceration. The Real Life program and myself are shining examples of what can happen when an individual is given the opportunity to have someplace safe, someplace that they can call home. I am currently a full-time case manager for Real Life, and I am proud to say that I am a lifer on the other side of incarceration.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Virginia Funders Network for having me. My name is Allison Gilbreth, and I'm the Policy and Programs Director at Voices for Virginia's Children. That video was so compelling that it made me think about sharing my why I'm here and about our organization. So really, my why starts in childhood. When I was 11 years old, I went into Virginia's foster care system, and that time period was traumatic. If you're familiar with Virginia's child welfare sector, you'll know that our foster care system is really struggling for so many reasons. I remember feeling confused, frustrated, angry, and feeling like, where is my voice? Who is my advocate? And I remember at 11 years old promising myself that I wanted to change the way that I felt in that system. And so many years later, I didn't know how to do that at 11 years old, as you might imagine, but many years later, I learned about the work of Voices for Virginia's Children, where I currently work. And I saw that they were making systems-level change for public policy, not only for children in foster care, but for so many of the systems that our children in Virginia experience. And when I tell you, I talked to everyone to figure out how can I work at this organization, because I wanted the things that I experienced as a child to be changed. I didn't want another child to live the same experience that I had. I'm so excited to talk to you today in this panel and learn a little bit more about the work and what needs to be done for Virginia's children. We are facing one of the greatest mental health crises that our country has ever seen. My family has personally, that is part of why I went into Virginia's foster care system, was because of unmet needs of mental health of my caregivers, who I'm happy to say we have been reunited for a very long time, and they're wonderful grandparents to my children. But I think that sometimes we can forget our why we get into this work because we're so busy trying to fundraise or trying to figure out how do we change the system. But when I hit those hard places, I remember our why. And 2 years ago, when I was frustrated with the work of not changing our child welfare system quick enough, I went back to my 11-year-old self and thought about what I wrote in my journal. And I started this creation of how do we put young people in the positions to drive policy change. So with that, we created our first ever Youth in Action at Voices for Virginia's Children, where we brought young people, we trained them on how to be advocates because they already had it within themselves, and then we gave them the opportunity to tell us what needed to change in the systems that they were being impacted by. And through that, we brought them to the Virginia General Assembly, and we had them as young people share their stories. That moment wasn't just healing for themselves, but it was also healing for me. And it was also healing for legislators. There have been so many moments over the last 2 years where I went to meet with a legislator with a young person. There was a young girl who's 14 years old who came to meet with me this past January, and she shared her story of how mental illness has impacted her family and herself. And that legislator actually got up and closed the door, which I thought, what's happening? And he just broke into tears. And he said, I will do whatever you tell me to do because I don't want another young person in my office sharing the story of how they needed help and that they didn't get it when they needed it. And that is why the work at Voices for Virginia's Children is so important, because we are giving youth the power to change the systems while they are in them and hopefully long after. I hope that that 14-year-old that I went with at a meeting this January is one day sitting in the seats that we are, so that they're continuing to create change. That's just a little bit about our organization, and I look forward to being a part of this panel for dinner tonight. Thank you.
Partnership for Housing Affordability was founded in 2004 with a simple mission: to raise awareness around affordable housing in the Richmond region. Since then, as the need for housing has risen, so too has the need for an organization like PHA. PHA has stepped into the role as the region's lead housing policy organization, educating local governments on their most pressing housing needs with sound research, leveraging collaboration to advance solutions, and serving as a trusted convener for both private and public stakeholders. Simply put, PHA operates as the backbone of affordable housing systems in Greater Richmond. The key to this is embedded within our name: partnerships. We would not be successful without having gained the trust of local government partners, whether urban, suburban, or rural, all of whom serve on the PHA Board of Directors. In 2020, with the help of local governments, PHA launched the Richmond Regional Housing Framework, an action plan that serves as the region's guiding housing strategy. Another critical component to developing institutional partnerships is our structure. PHA is not a direct service provider, meaning that we are not in competition with other nonprofit organizations for funding. Instead of building units, our mission is to advance policies through collaboration that enable our nonprofit partners to create affordable housing more easily. A great example of collaboration in action is the PDC Housing Grant, a $40 million statewide program created by Virginia Housing. When our local planning district commission was awarded $3 million to develop affordable housing units, they knew that PHA was the appropriate entity to deliver on the program. Our existing relationships with nonprofit builders and local governments enabled us to not only allocate the funding, but to do so in an equitable manner that would create units in underserved rural communities and award projects in every jurisdiction that applied for funding. This effort will help create more than 270 affordable rental and homeownership units in our region. Looking ahead, PHA is poised to lead the region's policy and advocacy efforts. The last 3 years have revealed that while funding and relief programs are essential to staving off crises, systems change through policy is most effective at solving our short-term and long-term needs. We have a board-approved policy committee that is comprised of local government staff, developers, and key housing stakeholders to help formulate our region's housing policy agenda. Additionally, PHA hosts an annual event called the State of Housing in the Richmond region, where we provide Richmond's leaders and housing community with an update on the prior year's accomplishments, concerning trends, and policy updates, and what is slated for the year to come. Such a well-functioning housing ecosystem can only thrive when all sectors, government, developers, service providers, and the private sector, buy into the issue as a region and avoid fragmented, incremental actions.
Hi, my name is Haley Taylor, and I'm the youngest member of the Calfee Community and Cultural Center Board of Directors. Part of the reason that I joined the CCCC is because I really wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself. I was really interested in the board, not only because my grandmother went to Calfee, but she herself has also been on several boards. So I was like, you know, it seems pretty cool to do the same things that my grandma did when I was 5 and 6 and 7. When I was an intern, we talked mainly about why Calfee started and how it was born out of segregation, but it progressed and it became something that was so much more. I think a lot of alum described it as a second family. So it was just really interesting to see that and to also learn about the history that I've never heard of. Like, I'd heard about Thurgood Marshall, but I had no clue that he was in Pulaski. Chauncey Harmon had actually corresponded with Thurgood Marshall in an attempt to create a lawsuit for equal funding with all Black students in the county. Chauncey Depew Harmon was appointed principal of Calfee Training School, and he himself was actually a native of Pulaski. In 1949, the struggle continued, and Black parents won their lawsuit against the Pulaski County School Board, which was ordered to give Black students improved facilities. This is one of 6 cases won by Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP that led up to the Brown versus Board of Education. Normally when people think of Black history, they think Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, slavery, it's kind of it. So I think people just need to be more aware of it, and it was just really nice to be part of something that brought it to light and revitalized the history of that. The goal of the CCCC is to raise funding in order to preserve the building and its history by providing the community with a museum, a community kitchen, a child care center, a digital learning lab, and an event and office space.
I'm Marilyn Harmon, and I'm delighted to know that Calfee School is going to be initiating a museum, but this museum will allow people not only in Pulaski, but Southwest Virginia, to know the contributions that were made in order to push education through this area.
I attended Calfee Training School, grades 1 through 7. One of my fondest memories was enjoying the delicious cornbread prepared by a cook, and she was always doing very nice things. For that reason, we decided to name our commercial kitchen the Lena Huckstep Community Kitchen. This kitchen will prepare hot meals for the children that attend our child care center. It will also be utilized by local partners like Beans and Rice and the Daily Bread.
I'm here to introduce the Dorothy D. Berry Venable Learning Lab. This will be a digital learning lab that'll help teach the youth of tomorrow transferable skills to help them in job preparation as well as get them some general life experience. As the communications coordinator for the CCCC, I've personally invested in this project.
The rich history of Calfee and the great need in Pulaski County for quality child care has been an inspiration to form the Lucy and Chauncey Harmon Learning Center. The Learning Center will serve approximately 100 infants, toddlers, and preschool-age children, and will also be a model of community collaboration among early childhood organizations.
The Calfee Community and Cultural Center will house the Broadnoe Baker Event Hall, which is named for 2 of Calfee's former band directors. A boardroom, gallery, and small rental office will also be available to community members and small businesses.
The Calfee Cultural and Community Center is going to meet educational, child care, nutritional, and other needs of our community that currently aren't being fully met. I'm very proud to be a member of the board.
I hope you enjoyed those videos as much as I did. Hearing those stories and seeing the different faces behind the work really gives a lot of flavor to the good work going on in our state. And in addition, we have some questions, and we've talked a little with our panelists beforehand, and I'm going to turn to each of them and ask some different questions to help us better understand their involvement and things they've learned along the way. And I'm going to start with Binti, since you're involved with Calfee. Okay? Are we all on? Are all the mics live? Okay, all mics are live. Just maybe hold it close. Oh, what number are you? 3. Number 3? While we're doing a mic check, what other numbers do we have? Okay.
Mine's on.
Okay, others are live. Thank you very much. Try that again. We'll pass them around. We just switched to number 2 or 5? 5. Number 5. Okay, thank you. So Binti, what a great story. How'd you get started? What got you involved?
I moved to Pulaski about 6 years ago. My mom grew up there, and I grew up in West Virginia. My parents retired there, and as they've gotten older, I moved back east and came to help them out some and started to learn about things going on in the community. And my mom is a graduate of Calfee Training School. And I thought, what an amazing project. I was working at the YMCA, and I kept hearing about it. And I kept trying to say, hey, if there's anything that you need, if you need any help, if I can do your social media, whatever I can do to get involved. And so that's really how I got involved in the project. And then as the project grew, and my experience grew, it was just fascinating to hear so much about not only how this history has impacted so many people in the community, but that those same folks really want to build a legacy for the future and be able to carry that on to the community and be able to really serve the members of the community in a way that they need it now.
You know, quite an amazing art, and I think for those involved in historic funding, the ability to look back, to look forward is really a great message, and it's really nice to hear you say that and show us how you're doing it. So, great vision. You've got that cathedral going there.
Oh, thank you.
Well done. Kristen, tell us a little about how you got involved with Real Life.
Sure. So I'll make one quick change.
I was introduced as Kristen Johnson. I did just get married last Saturday, so I'm now Kristen Reiser. So if you see me later, you see Kristen Reiser. I did not just change my name in between the panel and the cocktail party. So I first became involved in real life after Dr. Sarah Scarborough started the organization. But I'll back up a few years prior. I am a 2007 graduate of the University of Richmond School of Law, after which I became a magistrate. For those of you who aren't as familiar perhaps with the judicial system, the magistrate's the one that works in the jail, and in the middle of the night is the one that conducts bond hearings, writes search warrants, writes arrest warrants, you name it. And we're the ones that typically see people at the lowest points in their life. And it was, to be quite frank, it was very draining and very difficult for me. By my nature, I'm a helper. And no matter how many times I tried to find some sort of way within the legal justice system that I could help, there was nothing I could do. So I started doing a lot of volunteer work, a lot of soul searching. And much to my father's chagrin, after helping with law school, I made a complete career switch and had been volunteering with Real Life, again, since the beginning. Dr. Scarborough and I had been in school together at VCU. And finally, it was an opportunity where I felt like I could actually make a difference and I could help the very individuals that I hadn't been able to help before. And so as COVID, obviously things changed for everyone during COVID. At Real Life, we really exploded in terms of the number of individuals we are serving. Pre-COVID, we had 3 recovery transitional houses. Over the course of the next 2 years, we increased to 12. So obviously with that change in our service model, shifting to the housing first model, it was no longer practical for Dr. Scarborough to do all of the grant writing, all of the fundraising, all of the relationship creation and whatnot. So that's when I came on board.
Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Very exciting. Yay, another clap. That's great. Allison, you gave us a little about your why, which I just want to take a moment and say, I think those are deep emotions and sometimes hard to speak, but also as a hearer, great deep appreciation for your openness and sharing your story, because I think you've helped us see many of those gaps that cause children to fall through our cracks. And so hats off to you for being able to find a path forward that uses that story. So just another round of applause for sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I was hoping that you would share a little about your career trajectory and how that connected you.
Sure. So I was whispering to you while the video was going. Dr. Scarborough, when I was a governor's fellow, showed me, she sort of wanted to scare me a little bit before I went into this career to make sure I wanted to do it. She took me around to all the prisons in Virginia and just really showed me the whole system of, if we don't do things for kids now, this is the system that we have set up. And it really shook me. And prior to being a governor's fellow, a retired delegate, Delegate John O'Bannon, allowed me to my very first internship, my very first taste at policy. And he pulled me aside one day and he said, "You have something special. You really get this. You really get public policy." And he pushed me to go a little bit further with what I was very green to public policy at that time. And I knew I wanted to do something around children's advocacy. So when I went back to get I have my master's in social work from VCU, I had the opportunity to, again, come back into state government and intern at the then Lieutenant Governor's office and help establish their children's cabinet and really learn about how public policy works. And that led to my eventual role at Voices for Virginia's Children, where I got to lead get to lead our child welfare policy work. And I really, because we're a multi-issue, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, I get to see how all of the issues within children intersect. If we don't do right in our mental health system, we see them in juvenile justice, in foster care, all of these things. And so I'm so passionate about multi-issue, doing it all together, because we can talk about prevention, we can talk about early childhood education. All of those things make it possible for children to achieve their brightest potentials.
Thank you. So in selecting this panel tonight, part of the logic behind it was simply that all of you members had asked for some insights of, one, positive things happening in our state, but also some topics that weren't necessarily going to be covered on the plenary. So you're hearing tonight from people involved with substance abuse, with housing, with historic preservation, and equity in a sort of history teaching in new ways. I think, is that fair?
I think that's more than fair.
As well as youth engagement around mental health. So I want to name that for now. And then there's this cross-cutting theme that I want to explore a little bit, which is around community engagement. And a lot of folks have begun talking about that. How to do it, and the community of practice around that is still evolving. But I'm going to change the order a little bit and go with Kristen first and ask you to talk a little about how community engagement is taking place within the organization.
Absolutely. So back when we were founded in the Richmond City Jail, we were known as the REAL program. REAL stands for Recovery from Everyday Addictive Lifestyles. And that name was actually developed by the participants in the program. Everything we name, everything we create within all of our programs, we are very deliberate in incorporating the voices of those we serve. So for example, something as simple as our logo, as our colors, our tagline, things like that. Those are all selected by those we serve. The concept of a pathway navigator instead of a case manager. Even the term you heard in the video, lifer. When people first hear that, they're like, wait, you call those you serve lifers? Yes, because that is a term they have selected because they want to reclaim that negative connotation, and they want to turn it on its head because they're making a change for life. They are becoming part of real life for life. And they know it doesn't matter if they've been away from us for 2 years. If they hit a rough patch and they need to come back and they need to reach out to their pathway navigator, we're there for them. So we are very intentional about making sure their voices are heard and incorporated. So the REAL acronym, that's what they came up with. And as a result, I think, as you heard from more than half of our staff members are either graduates or have lived experience in the area. It is truly lifer, and being part of the Real Life program is truly a badge they wear with honor because they know how much they have overcome to get where they are, and they know how much that we value them and value their input.
Thank you. Allison, I know you talked already a little about how you've engaged the youth. Would there be anything you'd like to add about the broader population as you're trying to engage the adults, perhaps, in those young people's lives?
That's a great. We have Virginia's Youth in Action has only been around for actually less than a year. We're in our inaugural year, and it's challenging. If anyone has tried to work with youth, you'll know that youth have a lot of opinions. And I think one of the things we had to do as an organization was to prepare ourselves to work with young people and prepare ourselves to maybe change the way we view problems and solutions, because we would see a problem and they would see a completely different problem and a completely different solution based on the way they experienced it. So we had to open ourselves up to doing policy work a bit differently than we were used to. But what's interesting about the adults that we weren't prepared for were their parents. Their parents had often experienced the systems that we were advocating for change within too, and it's something we as an organization hadn't really thought about in our ideation process of how we're going to engage with their parents beyond signing permission slips, to be quite honest. And we realized that they needed the healing just as much as their child did through that process. So we have sort of changed the way we are working with them to engage their parent as well, and giving them the tools to do advocacy work. And some of them, I will say, we have a couple of young people who they might be president. They are that brilliant. And their parents were like, how do I raise this child who is so passionate and wants to see change, and I need them to get them to do their homework. So we're, as an organization, adapting to all those different needs and realizing that part of our role is to translate this heavy policy and data into very simple to understand and digest information, and then allow ourselves to let them be the change and let them guide our work.
Well, and we'll periodically highlight some keywords that you've heard already today, but technical fixes and adaptive fixes. So again, hats off. You've been able to figure out what was working, what wasn't, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. But Benti, if you could tell us a little about how you've engaged your community, because you've got a clear place, but you've got a lot of generations engaged with this work too.
Absolutely, we certainly do. I would say that our board, which is made up of a majority African American, and those African Americans are individuals who have a tie to the school. They either went to the school or they had a family member that went to the school, have really been, the board has really been at the center of everything that we're doing. And so they've been very supportive since we really intentionally selected a board. We had a very long selection process. There were probably almost 20 community organizations that were involved in helping us select these leaders that had applied to be on the board. And from that level of really wanting people to be at the table that had been touched by this history, that had been touched by the school, by this legacy, putting those folks at the forefront has been really, really important. So we've kind of started there, and as my colleague likes to say, we've provided a place where they can set the table and then invite other community members to come to the table. So with every piece of the project, and I think there are about 6 pieces of the project that you saw, we have held meetings, we have had community-wide surveys, we've had community-wide visioning sessions, and we have engaged intentionally with alumni and kind of putting them to the forefront, as I was saying, so that they really have a say in this building that had been neglected for so long. And sometimes when something that's very close to you has been neglected, you feel neglected, or you feel that the things that are important to you are not important to the rest of the community. So being able to shine a light on that and let them drive the conversation while also getting input from the rest of the community as to what the needs are for services has really, really been an important part of what we do. And I will say that, speaking of flexibility, we're untested. We haven't opened a classroom. We haven't opened our building yet. We haven't even started construction on doing the building yet. So a lot of the needs analysis, a lot of the really deep research that we've done in the community and with partners and providers are based on, we've made a lot of decisions and gone in a particular direction based on some well-informed assumptions that we've made. So we may get a year and a half down the road and say, oh, well, we made an assumption that this was going to be a need, and it really isn't. So I think that also having that flexibility is going to be a really, really important part of the process.
Thank you, and I've heard that word flexibility a few times. And I think it leads very well to the next line of questioning, because I think in philanthropy we talk about the art of implementation. And we can have the ideas, our supported organizations have ideas, and inevitably sometimes we get stuck. And the real challenge, and the line of the next set of questions, is around how do we get unstuck. And I do think the answers to this question vary as organizations mature, and fortunately, we've got enthusiastic, relatively young organizations, But Allison, I'm going to turn back to you. You did mention one adaptive challenge you had, and you solved it. But maybe you would like to speak to some of the organizational development that's been a challenge this year, and just highlight something that you'd like to say, where you got stuck and what you did to get unstuck.
Sure. Anytime you are building a new program into your organization, you know you're going to run into some challenges. That was sort of on our menu of things that would happen. We were fortunate that our funder, Richmond Memorial Health Foundation, told us at the very beginning, we expect you to adjust throughout this process of you launching this program. So we went in with a bit of an assumption that the young people would want to prioritize mental health based on the data and information that we were receiving. Some of those assumptions were correct. They did want to focus on mental health, but then they were very serious about wanting to take on community violence as well. Several of the young people had experienced community violence in their neighborhoods or in their schools, and they felt like they couldn't be an authentic youth advocate without advocating for that. And we had to have an internal conversation as an organization. Are we the experts? Are we ready to take this issue on? Can we support them the way they need to be supported? And the answer was yes. So we had to shift a little bit of our work around so that we could prioritize what they were asking of us, but what we got in return was their trust. And with that, I think we are going to be able to change systems in such a greater way because we took what they said at heart and made that shift. And it also required some shifting of some of our work internally, right? Like we couldn't accomplish every single thing we wanted to do. We knew if we were going to take that advisement, but we made that decision. And thankfully our board was very understanding. Some of the youth spoke to some of our board members and really understood and helped us navigate those changes and what we needed to prioritize.
Excellent, thank you. Benti, I know you haven't opened your doors yet, so you're still maybe a little stuck on that, but we've done a whole lot, right?
Stuck on that. We have done quite a bit. I think one of the obvious sticking points that we have was around funding. We had gotten our quotes from our architect on how much we thought this project in our best dream was going to cost. We raised all that money, and COVID hit, and we got sidelined for a bit. And when we went to get new quotes, our costs had pretty much doubled. So we are still continuing to raise funding. But I think one of the biggest challenges in how we have gotten stuck a bit is when you're working with a group of people that feel they don't have a say or their voices haven't been heard, such as the African American community. When you say you're going to do something and then it takes a couple of years to do that, you lose a little bit of confidence. And so we've gotten a bit stuck, even though we do all we can do to engage with the community. We have gotten a bit stuck with our engagement with the actual alumni. Some we have that are very, very engaged, not just board members, some of our biggest cheerleaders, but even members of my family that went to CalPhi will very often say, what's going on with that building over there? I saw you over there. Is anything going, why aren't they doing anything? Why can't we see any movement happening? So I think that is a point where we're hopeful that as we do have some construction start to happen, and we do some other programming, like we've got a Juneteenth celebration coming up, so please everyone who's in Southwest Virginia, come on down. As we do things like that, we're hoping to gain back some of that trust or build some of that trust, because quite frankly, sometimes the trust just hasn't been there.
So another insight just shared is that need for managing expectations. And I'm speaking to funders because we often have the same desire to see things done yesterday. So I will bring into the room the much esteemed community development pioneer, Joyce Dickens from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And she told me once, she said, when we started, we'd done our schooling, we'd done our training, we'd done our initial fundraising, and we did our first project. It was a housing project. They lost their investor for the tax credits. The project went from 3 to 4 years to 7 years. But that was okay. They didn't give up. They did their next project. Well, then things happened, and the next thing you know, it took 7 years. So then they said, okay, we're still going. We go to the next project, and then it took another 7 years. So I've kind of begun to think of community development projects in years of 7, because I'm really still looking for some projects that get done much faster than that. And for volunteers to continue to do their work all that time and then stay with it and not get stuck when they're stuck is commendable. So what you've done is those strategies to engage your stakeholders, tremendous, terrific. Kristen, have you been ever stuck in your work?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, with COVID, prior to COVID, we had a very large community center, and we had folks coming in every day. And then COVID hit. We closed our door, put a sign on the door that said, please call for services, shifted everything virtual, literally half a day off of classes, and then we were up online. But the phone number that was on the door, no one called for services. But instead what happened is people kept calling, asking for housing. Jails were releasing people at unprecedented numbers. People were receiving bonds at unprecedented numbers to try to address the community health issue within jails and prisons. So we did what I think has always, Dr. Scarborough has always done when she gets stuck and when we felt a little stuck, is we listened to those that we serve. And they kept saying, we need housing. We need a safe place to lay our head at night. We need a place where we have that sense of community. I feel like within COVID, so much of that sense of community, that isolation that we all experienced, when you're dealing with substance use disorder, isolation is your worst enemy. You need that sense of community and that support. So listening to them and opening those houses, and then continuing to listen and continuing to expand programming, of course being mindful of mission drift, but continuing to expand that programming to make sure that we were meeting those needs, that they were both verbalizing to us and not necessarily verbalizing, but showing us.
Yeah, and you listened.
Yes.
The final line of questioning tonight for this esteemed panel is around philanthropy and the role of philanthropy in your organization. And so, Benti, you brought up funding, and I'm going to come back to you to lead us off. Can you tell us a little about how philanthropy has been involved in your organization and any lessons you've learned that might help us as funders?
Sure. I will say that we've been very fortunate in getting some amazing partners and funding sources. A lot of our funding is through state and government grants, but we've also gotten quite a bit of funding through more smaller private organizations. We've even gotten funding from the Community Foundation of the New River Valley. And what's interesting is that when you look at the video, when you hear the story, you hear the alumni talking about what this building meant to them and how they want to build a legacy for the future, you often sit and think, well, if we want to build this legacy for the future, how are we going to do that in a sustainable fashion? And it's not necessarily just money, but it's also helping to build leadership. You might have noticed that several of our board members are young. They're not as young as they were when the video was made, but we were very intentional in including some younger voices so that we can help build the leadership capacity in our community. And I think that while that type of funding isn't necessarily the splashiest or the thing that is going to get the most tear-jerking and things like that, but funding that actually will help us to engage and build that leadership capability, within our communities so that we can sustain through the future is something that is really, really important.
Terrific. And I hope we'll all continue that conversation about engaging youth in leadership as we move forward in this conference. Kristen.
Sure. So I'm going to give a two-part answer, if that's okay with you, because I know earlier we had discussed the opioid settlement and the important implications of that. So as y'all are probably aware, as a result of the settlement, the states and localities were given relatively significant chunks of funding. Interestingly, though, only state and locality receive the funding in Virginia. Currently, nonprofits are not eligible for that funding. And so it's an interesting distinction. Some localities have elected to work with nonprofits. A great example is out in Southwest Virginia. They're opening their first residential treatment center for this program. In Henrico County, they're opening the first house for women and children impacted by substance use disorder. But that is something that will be likely addressed in the next General Assembly session. There are a number of organizations that are trying to help legislators realize this oversight, because a lot of them didn't realize that was the case. So that may open up a whole new stream of funding for some awesome nonprofits doing fantastic work. So I think that's important for folks to be aware of. If you're interested in learning more about contacting legislators and talking about this issue, feel free to chat with me at the bar later. But then in terms of real life over the past few years, one of the greatest things funders have done for us is helped us with something that's not necessarily a popular topic. You know, a lot of times the work we do, if we had tried to raise money for some of our programs 10, even 5 years ago, funders would not have funded us. I mean, it's not a sexy topic, I guess you could say. However, we have had funders that have recognized the importance. Case in point, we have our domestic violence prevention program. There is no program in the country, as far as Virginia Department of Health could tell, no curriculum written specifically for offenders of domestic violence, which there is a large cross-section that are also impacted by substance use disorder. While they're fantastic resources, it's very important that survivors have those supports. You're never going to solve the problem of domestic violence until you address the perpetrator and until you address those underlying behaviors, because a lot of times they were victims themselves or a family member was a victim, and it's that family cycle that continues on. Again, not many funders are willing to step up and say, yes, I'd love to fund a program that helps perpetrators of domestic violence, right? I mean, let's be honest. Fortunately, we had a funder out of the Community Foundation step up, of Greater Richmond, step up and say, no, this is really needed. And so we were able to create that curriculum, and now it is being implemented in several local jails as well as within the real life program. Virginia Department of Health is evaluating it and studying the results with the goal of offering that curriculum statewide to hopefully change the way domestic violence perpetrators are treated, in the sense that getting them the help they need as well. The other example would be our violence prevention initiative, working with Project Safe, Alive and Free. We're partnering with the John Randolph Foundation, and they've been an incredible partner. Again, it's a new area, and we're relying on their expertise. We're relying on Department of Criminal Justice Services expertise, but because it crosses into so many aspects of our work, it's crucial.
Well, and it speaks to this issue of not siloing and thinking holistically, but also funding holistically can be hard with the many other ways we do our work. So thank you for lifting that up. Allison?
Sure. So because we do public policy and we speak to legislators and do education for what we think are best for kids, we as an organization made a conscious decision to not take any state federal or local government money, because we don't want to ever put ourselves in the position to advocate for our own interests. We always want our work to be about what do kids need most. So that means we rely on philanthropy to make our mission possible. So we've been very fortunate that funders have funded our ideas and how we want to see change, but COVID really hit a lot of nonprofits, including ours. You know, a lot of the fundraising events that we had banked on having and doing, we just weren't able to do. So that really put our organization into a tough spot to do as much fundraising as we want. Truly, we could accomplish so much more, as so many organizations up here feel. And I think the magic word for any organization like mine is unrestricted funds. When we get a grant to do that, that is Christmas morning for us. And when funders really take the time to get to know our organization, and when they make the application process a really enjoyable experience, where we're not just typing 30 pages behind a computer, where the funder already knows a little bit about us, they want to hear more, and then they make that application process simple because they understand how difficult the work that we are doing is. And if we can spend a little less time filling out an application, that's more time and hours that our staff can put into doing the work. And that's probably the biggest thing that has made an impact for us, for the funders that we do have, is that they really have taken some time to get to know us as an organization and as the staff on our team.
Thank you. And as one last insight about this group, each of them have mentioned the pandemic. And yes, we're coming through our third year of this word that many of us didn't even know before March of 2020. And here we are still talking about the consequences of it. So with that in mind, I think there are more conversations to be had, and I want to kind of bring Jovan back into the room, because housing was also something that was not seen as a crisis issue in all communities and as widely as it is before the pandemic. And the state of Virginia took some bold moves around eviction and policy protections, around subsidies. Our electric utilities, I know Dominion's been here, carried a huge weight trying to help people make ends meet. And so we know this has been a really tough time for everyone. I think we're still healing from it, but talking about getting stuck, it's really commendable that 2 organizations were birthed during the pandemic. Were all 3 of you? Kristen, was real life?
So we were created before the pandemic, but really the explosion of growth, going from a staff of 4 to a staff of, I believe we're at 25 now, that all occurred during the pandemic.
So tremendous issues of substance abuse, many needs, but in mental health especially, but positive ways of seeing that work take place. For our IT folks, I'm going to shift over to the larger podium for just a minute. But as I do that, I'd like to invite all of you to thank our wonderful panelists with a big round of applause. I'm reviewing the day, and what you see on the screen is a very amateur word cloud. But it was sort of fun just periodically during the day to jot down some words, and I missed lots of them, and I even missed more trying to type them into an Excel spreadsheet to produce this. So just with some apologies aside, and admission of amateur status, I still think some words really did stand out today, and I'm sure as we have more discussions at our tables, you'll name some others. But this slide really reflects a lot of the issues, the topics, the work that I heard being discussed today. And you heard this through our speakers, you heard them in these roundtables, and you heard them across discussions during lunch and even this evening. What I would observe about these words is they are more in the technical space. They doesn't make them easy to solve, but they tend to have a focus of things and ideas. But there was this other layer of work that I found that's going to be on the next slide, which speaks to the emotions that I also heard. And I think it's important to bring these into the room as well,
As you heard with our panelists, a lot of people have dealt with a lot of struggle these last 3 years, but it wasn't new. Many people were dealing with those same struggles prior to 2020. And so it leaves us with words like fear and scared and a little overwhelmed once in a while. But at the same time, philanthropists are optimistic and express a lot of joy and love and kindness. And so as we think about what will end this evening, we recognize that grief and sadness and hardship, suburban renewal was one of those, that urban renewal, that came up in the walk this morning for those who did the Gainsborough visit. I'm still feeling very heavy from having to take in that story once again and realizing we haven't really learned from some of that work. And I heard more stories of things that are happening. So we recognize in philanthropy that all of us carry that weight and take it very seriously. But to end our evening, we also wanted to talk about some things that are positive. You've heard some of those great examples. Another one I'm just going to share because I love it, and it's something that the Allegheny Foundation has funded, is the Allegheny Mountain String Program, which is under Garth Newell up in Bath County. And I know many of you fund the Junior Appalachian Musicians in Southwest Virginia. And as a native of Grayson County, which is one of the homes of old-time music, it's been a sort of cultural learning opportunity over my lifetime to discover that Wade Ward down the road is in the Smithsonian with his banjo. And Folkways recorded music throughout Southwest Virginia and continues to archive it, and it's there for us to listen to. And I have some very brave but reluctant Southwest Virginia philanthropists who are going to join me. And I'm going to ask all of you to join me as well in the last thing we're going to do for this part of our session tonight before Victor comes up to close us out. And that is a little group sing-along. And for those of you who just started squirming because you haven't done that since you were in elementary school, get over it, okay? Number one rule of community collaboration is try it on, right? How many times have you heard it? So to help you out, there's going to be some words coming up on the screen. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to do 2 verses. And we're going to have the chorus in between. And the reason it felt important was not just because music can be very uplifting, but it's sort of staying anchored in our little visit here to Southwest Virginia. The mountains and hollers of this region were isolated and lonely, and it was hard to get around. And yet, the primarily early Scotch and Irish immigrants carried very few instruments, but they started building them when they got here. And there are pictures of cigar box fiddles, and there's the the old-time dulcimer that is tuned to the bagpipes. Those were the early instruments of Appalachian music. But as African slaves began to play their banjos and do the same thing, build new styles of banjo to try to create more music that felt like home, it was quickly integrated into old-time music. And old-time music was deeply rooted in those Scotch-Irish traditions, but the banjo is accompanied by, or fiddle accompanied by banjo is one of those early creations. And I think it's an important ethnology or musicology sort of piece to recognize the African influence in early mountain music, and even more important to then bring the Latin instrument of the guitar, which came up from Spain primarily and filtered through Texas and brought all kinds of other new sounds into our region. So it's a great story. I don't know it like many do, but for me it's a fascinating journey of how our region reflects so many different pieces, not only in our food, but also in our music. And so it looks like Andy's my lone volunteer at the moment. So Andy, you and I are going to sing, and everybody at the table is going to join us, right? Right? Am I hearing a big yes? Amen, sister? Oh, good. They're getting their legs. Here we go. Can you pass out the words for me? They'll be on the screen, too. Here you go.
Better.
Give that to the gang.
All right, there's that. You know, Mary, I'm from southern West Virginia, and there was a story in my family that when the preacher took his jacket off, you were going to be there a while. Now, you don't have to be here a while. I'll put this jacket right on real quick if you all just get involved here and you sing along. Because you don't want to hear me sing, so we got to, like, elevate it here, okay? So.
Perfect. Okay. So there are many pockets of great music. Those of you from the Bristol area have really celebrated that. Carter Family Fold, Scott County, all the Carters. There's a great rendition of the song we're about to sing, Keep on the Sunny Side, where Johnny Cash talks about singing this song and loving this song and then marrying into the Cash family. I don't think that was the reason behind it, but you know, these connections and the ties to country music are tremendous. Marion is celebrating the Wayne Henderson Music Center. We're seeing the Crooked Road across Southwest Virginia. So music continues to be a very important part of our area. And just to make sure this well-rehearsed choir knows how we're going to go forward, I'm going to give you a short intro to get us a pitch. We're going to sing the first verse. You're welcome to join in if you know it. Don't hesitate. Words are up there. We're going to go to the chorus. We're going to sing the second verse. We're going to go back to the chorus, and by then I'm expecting all of you to know the song, and we're going to sing the chorus a second time and wind up with one last repeat of the last line. Okay? Think you can handle that? All right. I'm going to just move this down a little bit here. Can you hear me back there? There's a dark and a troubled side of life. There's a bright and a sunny side too. And I meet with darkness and strife. The sunny side will always be true. Here we go. Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Oh, keep on the sunny side of life. It will help you on the way, it will brighten every day, if you keep on the sunny side of life. Though the storm in its fury break today, crushing hopes that will darken just so dear, storm and cloud will in time least way, the sun again will shine every day. Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Oh, keep on the sunny side of life. It will help you every day, it will brighten every way, if you keep on the sunny side of life. And again, keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It will help us every day, it will brighten all the way, if you keep on the sunny side of life. If you keep on the sunny side of life. Go VFN singers! Well done! Woohoo! All right, Victor.
Good job, Mary.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everybody.
Mary, that was awesome.
Thanks, Victor.
Woo! Woo! Let's give it up for Mary and the group. That was awesome. All right, I know the day has been full and long. My name is Victor Branch, and I get to bring the day's program and the evening's program to a close. I get the privilege to serve as the regional president of Bank of America in the Richmond region. Bank of America is, as you know, one of the sponsors here. of this VFN conference, and my great teammate Aaron Hogan and I are so proud to be affiliated with all of you great funders and nonprofits who are making this the best commonwealth and state in the country because of what you do. I stand between you and the bar, so I am going to be brief. I recognize the precarious position I'm in, but I wear a couple of hats. I work for Bank of America, and I want to, I don't see too many corporate funders, but I want you to recognize corporate funders are right here beside you doing this work as well, and we want to make sure we show up and we deliver. And I get the privilege also to serve on several boards, but my favorite board is the Community Foundation of Greater Richmond, and I get to co-chair that board. So to help make Richmond its best community and to ensure everybody is having an opportunity to succeed. So I got the best job and the best volunteer job in the country by serving both of these organizations. So I'm preaching to the choir, and I know that you all are just so committed to this work, and you would not be here at this conference if were you not. And I just love sharing this quote before I'll close with this quote, but I do have one bit of instructions that the staff has given me. Please make sure you take the resilience cards on the table and the book with the instructions in it before you leave tonight. Please take those with you. And I'll just close out with this thought. And we heard it from this amazing panel, how they have navigated through the pandemic and been there and met that moment. And I remember hearing at a chamber meeting last year, remember as we were coming through and coming out of the pandemic, and we got all excited that it looked like things were going to really return to normal, and everybody you saw said, it feels like we're getting back to normal. It feels like we're getting back to normal. And a very wise woman at the chamber said, you got to remember, normal was not good enough. Because we cannot return to normal. This group of people, look around the room. Look in the mirror. You are going to ensure that our communities in Virginia don't return to the way it was. We're going to return to a better and more impactful normal. And that is why we're here tonight.